Good morning, everybody, and thank you very much for joining the IDPE and Graham-Pelton Benchmarking Survey webinar. We're just going to hold on for another minute or two just to make sure that everybody's with us, and then we'll begin. Great. Okay, thank you everybody for joining us. It looks like most people are here that registered. I'm recording this webinar, so we'll make sure that a link's circulated around afterwards. So a few just little bits and pieces of housekeeping before we get started. I'm going to introduce you to Jo Beckett and Christian proper, but before then I just thought I'd run through how the format will be. Christian will do a presentation after Jo's introduced herself, following which there'll be an opportunity to pose questions to the panel. If you type your questions into the question and chat box on the right hand side, I'll keep a note of them, and when Christian's finished we will pose those questions to Christian and Jo. If there are more questions afterwards, then we will make sure that they're dealt with following the webinar, and do feel free to get in touch with us if you've got any more questions following the webinar. You'll see that also on the right hand side there are 5 handouts which you're very welcome to download. Without further ado, I will hand over to Jo Beckett, who will say a few words about the benchmarking survey before passing over to Christian. Jo?
Thank you very much, Liz. Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us on this distinctly foggy and autumnal morning. By the end of this webinar, we hope you'll have a much better understanding of the role of benchmarking and how benchmarking can help you in your office, who can participate, and what's involved and how to prepare. So many of you will know this is IDPE's 3rd benchmarking survey for schools raising funds. And this next survey is going to help us build upon the previous 2, not just to give us a better understanding of development in schools, but also what underpins best practice in development in schools, so that we can understand what drives raising more money and helping more young people. So in the past, IDPE's benchmarking surveys have consistently attracted strong support, and the majority of schools raising funds have participated. So this means that the data is robust and representative of the sector. And a few weeks ago, I was at a meeting with all the heads of associations of the independent schools associations. So heads, bursars and governors have been briefed about this forthcoming benchmarking survey and are looking forward to seeing the report next spring. IDPE have partnered with Graham-Pelton Consulting, and we're investing in this 3rd survey together to highlight the impact your work has on school life and young people. And we've had the input of about 60 members, so some of you on this call today will have helped us actually develop the survey, and your feedback has been very important in helping to shape and evolve the survey. This survey will have much more segmentation, so what that means for you is that you can make meaningful comparisons with schools that are similar to yours. So in essence, this survey has been developed by members for members. So how can benchmarking help you? Well, the results in the report will enable you to have much more informed conversations with your senior management team about investment in your office, your strategy, and also agreeing realistic performance indicators. So what do you need to be aware of before the survey launches, and who can take part? Well, every school with an alumni relations and or fundraising program can take part. So even if your school is focused just on alumni relations right now, we would very much encourage you to take part. 50% of the questions are optional, so some will and some won't apply. But it's really important that we understand as a sector what's stopping schools from fundraising, as well as answer those vital questions, like, you know, how much are we raising compared to X school, and how much and what should we be investing? So the most important thing to know is that it's free to take part, and every participant, every school that participates will receive a free hard copy of the report. The survey opens this time next week, so next Tuesday, the 8th of November. And if you complete the survey by the end of the year, so the 31st of December, then your school will receive four free hard copy reports. So in essence, you'll have a report for your office, your head, your bursar, your governor. And the value of those reports is around about £100. It's straightforward to complete. IDPE and Graham-Pelton are going to be here to guide and support you along the way. There's already a guide and top tips to help you prepare the data, and you can see that, you can download that from the right-hand bar of your screen, or you can call the office or download it from the website. There'll also be experienced users of the survey on hand to give you first-hand advice and support. So I'm going to hand over to Christian Proper, who's the Senior Consultant at Graham-Pelton Consulting, who will tell you a little bit more about the detail of the survey. Chris.
Thank you, Jo. Okay, so this is some more information about the IDPE and Graham-Pelton Consulting Schools Alumni Relations and Fundraising Benchmarking Survey for 2016. Okay, so points of comparisons. Whether it comes from our trustees, governors, institution leaders, or from our own team, sooner or later someone from within those groups is going to ask you, what are other similar organisations raising? How can they raise X million pounds when we can only raise Y million pounds? Who should we be benchmarking ourselves against? And there's an increasing drive to benchmark our fundraising and performance in order to understand, through comparison with others, whether we're raising as much as we can or whether we are investing enough in fundraising. With increasing interest in fundraising amongst trustees and governing bodies, this appetite for benchmarking data will ever increase. So how can we assure trustees that their organisation is getting the return on investment that it should? And how can they know if their fundraising teams are performing well? Yeah, can they only truly know through the insight that comparative data brings? Well, at this point, you'll all be getting quite nervous and thinking, wow, benchmarking is quite a blunt tool. And if trustees are simply looking at the amount raised and the amount spent, then the comparison is meaningless, really, because you're all so different. All the schools operate in quite a different environment. You have a different constituency base for another organisation, for another school. Some of you have been fundraising for a lot longer times than others. You might be employing different fundraising techniques. You have different projects to focus on. And some of you will get additional support in terms of making the ask. So even though your budget might be quite small, your head or your board or other volunteers might be making or undertaking a lot of activity to make asks and raising money as well. So that might not necessarily be reflected in the budget and expenditure for your team. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so it basically means, you know, you can't compare apples and pears, and for benchmarking to provide a real insight, it must take into account the variances and enable an apples to apples and pears to pears comparison and truly allow you to compare what works and what doesn't work. And that's pretty much the attitude that we've taken to this year's benchmarking survey. But also, we're looking at benchmarking as an invaluable tool for you as well within the development office. So, you know, it should help you with strategic planning. You should be able to see from the results that, oh, hello, for example, you know, quite a lot of schools have gone into crowdfunding, and that's increased the number of donors they've had. So why don't we look into using a tool like this for our donors next year? You can really, by really comparing apples and apples and looking at comparative data between similar schools, you can really look at and see how much money it is possible to raise with the kind of budget and kind of constituency pool that you have. And that should reflect in much more concise key performance indicators in terms of how much it is possible to raise. And also, the trustees and the governing bodies should be able to invest in confidence. If you can show through this report that investing in fundraising and alumni relation works for some of these schools, it will work for your school as well. And you can use this to build your teams, to take out additional fundraising approaches or invest in additional fundraising approaches to really help the school raise even more funds. Okay, so the journey so far. So as I said, we're very keen to compare apples with apples, and which is why IDPE has gone into partnership with us at Graham-Pelton to lead on this benchmarking survey. We as a consultancy firm have a passionate commitment to data-driven fundraising, and we understand the power that data can provide in terms of strategy, informing strategy. And benchmarking data, therefore, is an invaluable tool for strategic planning and fundraising performance management, and can empower trustees and governing bodies to invest with confidence. So, following the previous two surveys, we have spent most of this year reviewing the questions that were asked and working with schools such as yourselves to get feedback on what has worked and hasn't worked in previous surveys, and that has enabled us to customize the survey quite extensively this year. So we sent out, well, we sought feedback from about 60 schools, and out of that we formed an advisory panel of around 20 different schools, which are listed on this slide. So we've worked with them to work through various revisions of the survey, and we're now just about ready to launch, and as Jo said, it's actually launching on next Tuesday, the 8th of November. So going forward, so it opens on the 8th of November. You will have around 2 months to complete the survey, so we've given you quite a lot of time. The deadline will probably be towards the end of January, but as Jo said, if you complete it by the end of December, you get the benefit of having some extra hard copies made available to you. Now, the key part of this is that there will be this report, which will be published in the summer term, but also you will have the chance to order bespoke reports at a cost of £500, which delve into more detail into your school's performance against others, particularly, and this is the whole point of the greater customization, particularly amongst schools which are similar to your own. And then in June, at the IDPE annual conference, we will also be making 2 separate presentations on the results. One presentation will be geared towards the leadership of schools, so heads and bursars, and the other will be directed towards development directors to see what lessons can be learned and how you can use the benchmarking survey to best effect. Okay, taking part. So the survey covers 2 financial years, so we're looking at 2014-15 and 15-16. So historically, the surveys have been run every 2 years, and they've always covered 2 years' worth of data. They are free to take part, so there's no cost involved at all, and you'll get you'll get 1 hard copy and a digital copy of the final report sent to you if you take part. Responses are confidential, and results will be anonymized. So we're not going to be listing names of schools in any order as a result, and we won't be naming any schools in the report. Results will be collated and arranged in types of groups of school. We've listened to feedback, and we have introduced optional questions this year. So in the past, all the questions were compulsory, but actually what we're really looking for is there are some really key questions that we want all the schools to answer, because they will really shape our understanding of schools' fundraising sector, and what the concerns are amongst those, and how well fundraising is performing as a sector as a whole. So they're really the key ones that we want to answer, want everybody to answer. But we have got optional questions for those of you who are looking to get more in depth into the results. and obviously the more questions you take part in, the better the results will be, and the more understanding you will get out of the report. So these are really types of questions which delve into a lot more detail as to, for example, how your head interacts with fundraising, how they get involved, and how exactly you raise money, sort of breaking down how much money you've received in those last 2 years. We're also working with the regional groups for IDPE to introduce these super users. So they've basically come out of the advisory panel. These are people, these are schools who've had a lot of involvement with the shaping of the survey. They know the questions, they've seen them for quite a while, and they're really on hand as well to, within your region, to be able to address some of those questions for you. Okay, what comes next are a series of slides which show you how the questions are structured. I'm not going to sit here and read through all the different questions, but they're intended to give you a bit of a flavour and an introduction as to what kind of things we're going to be asking about. So to begin with, we look at questions about your school and alumni demographics. Next slide, please, Liv. So, and these are questions which will help us to customize the report for various types of schools within the school's fundraising sector. So we're looking at IDP regions, whether you're a public or state school, what type of gender makes up your school, whether you offer boarding, what kind of age groups, what kind of setting your school is in, how many students or pupils you have, what fees you charge, and also looking at bursaries and scholarships that have been awarded. The next slide shows you a bit more about alumni demographics. So again, in terms of us being able to customize and segment the results, it's quite interesting to see what your constituency, your fundraising constituency is made up of. So how, what's your male to female ratio, what's your UK to international ratio, and what's the average age of the alumni body. So we can see those who are very young schools will have a very young alumni base, and those who have been fundraising for a long time, or where the school has been operational for a long time, the age of the population will be skewed towards the older pool. But also where schools have started to take in more and more pupils, the average age will be skewed towards a younger demographic as well. And you can see here that we're giving an indication within each of these sections how many of these questions are required. Again, so for next then, the development office and team, again, this is so we can group similar development officers together to show, what is possible and how they spend their time doing things. So this is actually one of the key parts, is finding out how big your team is. Are you a one-man band? Do you have a huge team? It's not much point comparing a huge team against somebody who's working on their own. So this is really sort of drives into that, and we also look at costs, so how much you spend on staff and non-staff across the year, and what the percentage distribution of duties are for your team as well. So do you spend most of your time doing alumni relations, face-to-face visits, telephone campaigns, that kind of information. We also take into account staff shortages. So we know that in small teams, 2 or 3, if one of you goes, that can have quite an impact on your performance. So we're very keen to capture that data as well. FTEs, by the way, stands for full-time employees. So that's basically if you've got 2 people who are doing half a day each. If you add them together, that makes 1 full-time employee. Okay, we then ask some questions about senior development professionals, and that's really a survey about what it takes to get a leader for your fundraising operation. So these are your development directors, heads of development, or external relations directors. How many of each type are being employed across the school? What does their age and gender look like? What kind of salary do they get? So this is really intended to help you guys show how much, how well you do and how much you sort of are valued within the school, but also it'll help primarily heads to decide, okay, so this is the kind of person we need to employ, this is what the average salary is amongst typical schools. So you might get a direct benefit out of that as well. We're then quite keen to find out a little bit more about the senior leadership, so the heads and bursars, and find out how much time do they devote to fundraising and development. What do they actually do for you? You know, do they rewrite your letters, or do they come to events, or do they actually make face-to-face asks with some of your key prospects? And also asking, what would you like them to do? Because I think this is a really useful opportunity for you to feed back as a group to say, you know, heads, stop rewriting our letters, but do get involved in events and speaking to prospects, you know, that kind of stuff. Yeah, and who else gets involved? These are all optional questions. I don't think they'll take very long for you to answer, but, you know, there's no requirement for you to go through this. Alumni relations. So we've had feedback that in the past there weren't that many questions on alumni relations, so we've beefed this section up a bit. Talking about how many events have been organised and who else organises events for you as well. Do you have a separate alumni association? Do alumni get invited to other school events? What volunteering opportunities do you have, and do you record how many hours people volunteer for you? How many publications you produce? And although this is called alumni relations, for historic purposes, more and more these days you're including many different types of constituencies. So we're trying to work out who else you're engaging with. Current parents, obviously, for example, but you know, some of you might be engaged in the local community, staff particularly as well. Following on from alumni relations, website and social networking. Again, just trying to find out how this is structured within schools. Do you have one website that does all? Do you have separate websites? Do you have a special members area where people can log in and communicate with each other? Do you have a news feed? How often does that get updated? And how do you use the various multiple social media channels that are available to you? And how active are you within those different tools as well? In terms of database and research, so finding out what kind of database you use, but also looking at some of the data that is held in there. So how many contactable records do you actually have? Again, that's quite useful for us being able to segment the results into development officers of similar makeup. What kind of data do you hold on people? Is it just contact details? How, you know, do you have education details, further education details, employment history, that kind of information? How many prospects do you have? How many identified prospects do you have? And do you have a moves management system? So are you using your database to record what kind of approach you've made with your various prospects and how likely they are to give at some stage in the future? So just getting some sort of, again, background data here that will help us to see and understand the fundraising results that people are getting. Okay, so up to this point it's been very much, you know, you feeding back and telling us some quite normal information. The fundraising activities, this is where it does get a little bit more complicated for some of you. You might need to speak to your bursary to break down some of the results. You might want to chat to your database managers to see what reports they can write to you. And this is also an area where I think the regional teams will be instrumental in helping you to achieve or help each other to write some of the reports that you might need to produce in order to answer these questions. If you get really stuck, you know, obviously you can also ask us and IDPE or myself to help you with this. But basically, we're just asking, you know, what kind of methods do you use to solicit donations? How many donors do you have? What's your total philanthropic income? And then we have optional questions here to break that down by the relationship you have with your donors. Yeah, so whether they are alumni, parents, staff, or others. And in terms of income as well, we also then ask about additional expected income from pledges and recurring gifts in the next couple of years. So do you record for example, that you've got a pledge of for £500,000 coming in next year, and recurring gifts, so regular gifts, you know, the £10 a month type donations that have been going for a couple of years, and you know you've still got another couple of years of active donations coming in, provided that the donor doesn't cancel their direct debit or standing order, obviously. But how much could you realistically expect to come in from those? So we treat those two as separate figures. So we're very keen to report on income received, but then acknowledge the fact that you might have some other pledges coming in the next couple of years. Knowing about unfulfilled pledges, I think it's also quite good to know, you know, what's causing problems in terms of not getting the money in. Okay, and then quite quickly, we've got a couple of other areas, a bit more detailed into fundraising. So one on campaigns. If you're on a campaign, what's your target? How many? What kind of stage are you in? What projects are included? That kind of stuff. And then for legacies, we're just asking very briefly, do you have a legacy society? And what's the number and value of legacy pledges, and also the value of legacies received? And then to round this all up, the final questions are really about finding some of those really impressive fundraising stories that we can use to highlight the good that fundraising within schools can do. So as you know, fundraising has had a bit of a knock in recent years in the press, and independent schools and their charitable status has also been questioned at times. I think this is your opportunity to show what impact your activities have made to the school. And personally, I'm quite excited by that, because I think we should be able to get some really good stories out of this to show that this is a worthwhile thing to do. Well, at the same time, we're also appreciating that there are many challenges that you face, and we'd like to hear a little bit more about those challenges, so this is an opportunity for you to mention those. And then, you know, there are lots of things happening in the sector, you know, data protection, fundraising, regulations, independent schools, grammar schools. So how do you see your role changing in the next few years as well? So again, these are all optional questions, but I think this will be quite a good opportunity for you to feedback and use that as a report, and you know, see that in a report. Okay, so those are the areas of questions that the survey will contain. There are around 110 questions, but 50% of those are optional. But obviously, the more you complete, the more value you will get from the campaign, from the survey. We encourage as many schools as possible to take part. So please do spread the message as well if you're taking part in this, and you know some of your contemporaries across other schools aren't. Do encourage them to take part. It's the benefit of everybody that as many people fill in their data as possible. You know, the more data there is, the more realistic and accurate the results can be. We're going to segment the data into, or the report will present the data by different types of schools as well. So as well as an overall results, you will get quite a lot of benefit from as an individual school, seeing how girls' boarding schools perform, for example. So the survey opens 8th November, and the report will be made public in the summer term, and start your regional super user group as well. So, I mean, we've only got a week to go now, but if you are interested in having early access to the survey, do let me know, and we can arrange that for you. Great. I think that is it for me. So if you have any questions about any of this, obviously we've got some questions which Jo will field, not Jo, sorry, Liv will field in a minute, but any other questions now or while you're completing the survey, feel free to email myself or call our IDPE up as well.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks very much, Christian. The questions are starting to come in, so I shall run through them. We have to stop by 11:30, so if we don't get through them all, then we'll certainly deal with them after the webinar closes. first question is about compulsory questions. Somebody wants to know, is it possible to have an unrecorded or unknown answer as a response to a compulsory question?
That's a good question, and yes, absolutely. Where that is applicable, we have got those options. Otherwise, you can also just put in a 0 where it's a numeric field to know that it's not relevant for you.
Great, thank you. And another question has come in asking if it's possible to complete the questions online in several stages.
Yes, it is. So it is a online questionnaire survey that you can complete. The survey is split up into these various sections, and to help you, I mean, obviously, as you go through the survey, you know, there are some key questions that you have to answer before you move on to the next stage. But what we also are doing is providing an Excel spreadsheet at the same time that you can download, where you can see all the questions in one go, and you can use that as a sort of a working copy of your results. So you don't have to use the spreadsheet to fill in the answers. We'll provide boxes on there for you to do so. But it's quite nice to share the questions with the bursary, for example, in that way, or to your database manager to collate some of those figures, and then the answers can be transferred across to the online survey.
Thank you.
Okay.
Next question, can you clarify if the bursary and scholarship segment will be clearly separated?
The scholarships and the bursary section, okay, that's an interesting question. Maybe that person just answer or write back in and say whether you mean within the fundraising income or within the school. Because we also have a bursary and scholarship section about the school's makeup, how many people have got how many pupils are there on scholarships, and how many get a bursary. So it's a bit tricky to answer that one. Certainly within the schools part, we do ask, it's a separate question asking how many bursaries and scholarships there are, and they are separate. One answer for bursaries, one answer for scholarships, and the number of pupils for each. And then within the income section, it's one of the optional questions where you can specify what kind of funds were supported, so you can put the values raised against the different types of projects, so whether they're capital, whether they're bursaries and scholarships and that kind of thing. So hopefully that answers you. If it doesn't, do let me know, and we can talk offline or later on during the session if that helps.
Thanks, Christian. And also the same person has asked, in the cost of department segment, will this information be contained solely within IDPE and in particular not available to any new fundraising Etherington linked organisation?
Yes, yeah, all the data you supply, we have got a privacy policy, obviously, so the data will be used only for the purposes of producing this report. It won't be used for any other purposes.
Thank you. And are there ready-made reports on Razor's Edge? And if not, could Razor's Edge prepare? Otherwise, lots of people doing reports in different ways takes lots of time.
Yeah, okay. We have spoken to Razor's Edge and Blackboard about this, and they've been involved in producing standard reports for benchmarking exercises for quite a few years. They do have a standard report that they can use, but they do charge for it, and it's about £500. So yes, it is there. You can use that to help with this report, but to be honest, I wouldn't, well, maybe I shouldn't say that. It's up to you whether you want to spend £500 or not on that aspect. But some of the other ready-made reports in Razor's Edge, absolutely. You've got cash income reports within Razor's Edge, where you can specify the date range, and you can break that down by appeal, by fund, and you can use those figures. You can include gift aid or not, and you can use those figures to populate the survey questions.
Can I add a comment in, Chris? This is Jo.
Yep.
I saw a really good initiative recently at the Southwest Regional Meeting where they actually identified who was using which database, and they were going to support one another in clusters to, consistently, pull off the information they needed from the different databases. So that's something that, you can consider doing through your regional vice president or through IDPE. We can help you with that.
Great, good point, Jo. Thank you.
Thank you. Another question comes in. What is the definition used for bursaries versus scholarships?
Okay. We use a standard definition, I guess, in that bursaries are used to top up and support activity while pupils are at school, whereas a scholarship tends to fund the course. I don't know whether anybody else wants to add anything else to that.
Thank you. Another question has come in. Oh, just going back to that one, the same person has said that's completely different from their definition, so perhaps we need to do some work on clarifying the difference.
Okay, that's fine.
Another question.
Yeah, let's talk further on that one. That's fine.
Okay. Will the number 0, the digit 0 in a response, not adversely influence averages as an outlying value?
No, we'll take the zeros out. Don't worry.
Great. And somebody's asked, how long does the survey take to complete?
Okay, so filling in the answers into a web form takes about an hour or so if you're just typing in the questions. Obviously, getting some of the answers will take various people different lengths of time, so it depends on how familiar you are with your database or how comfortable you are in the bursary and providing you finance information. But it's, we're reporting on financial years, so it should, most of you will probably know how much money you've raised in each of those years, and it's the breaking that down into the types of funds or by who has donated that money that might take you guys a little bit longer to find out. So it's that research time that we want to allow for, which is why we've given 2 to 3 months really to complete the survey, so to give you time to find those answers. And we've provided an Excel spreadsheet for you as well, so you can share the questions and you can let various people fill in their bits at the same time. I think it's more a case of making sure you've allocated enough time in your diary to find all the answers that you need.
I think it's important to add at this point that this survey is established. Some of you will have completed the first and second surveys, so you'll be used to sort of gathering your data together. And this survey is very much a sort of commitment to the sector. It's going to be happening every other year. It's going to continue to happen. It's established, and so if you haven't completed previous surveys, it's worth sort of getting into the practice of collating the data that you're going to need for future surveys as well.
Yeah.
Okay, just coming back to the bursaries and scholarships points, somebody's just added a bit of clarification that they define bursaries as mean tested only, used to pay for all or part of fees, whereas scholarships are like a prize based on performance regardless of the wealth of the fee payer. And there's another comment on the same point saying bursaries are means tested for pupils with financial need and can be up to 110% to cover uniform and trips, etc., whereas scholarships usually are a smaller percentage of fees for children with particular talents in, for example, music, art, academic, and it's not based on financial need but as an incentive.
Yep, that sounds right to me.
Great. Okay, and another question, who should complete the survey?
Who should complete the survey? Good question. Obviously, for development directors, this is aimed at development directors or people who are managing the fundraising and alumni relations operations. You'll be putting in questions about your salary. We're not asking for exact salaries, it's salary bands, but still you will, as a development director or equivalent, you'll want to oversee what the responses are. So although you might get other people to answer certain questions, you'll want to be the person who will review those questions and put them onto the survey, I would have thought, or at least be the person who reviews the answers before the submit button is pressed.
Great, thank you. What do you do if an alumnus is also a parent, and how do you report income received for such groups?
Okay, so this has been the subject of quite a lot of debate. Obviously, quite a few people, or a reasonable percentage of your database will have more than one relationship with you, and that's whether it's alumni and parents or governors or staff. People can wear many hats. That also means the results could get quite complicated to report on very quickly. So the decision that we've made is that you should record the result against the group that you feel has got the most affinity or relationship, the highest level of relationship with your institutions. So for a case where it's an alumni and a current parent, we would suggest that you record that the income received against the current parent row rather than the alumni row. But if you disagree with that, that's absolutely fine. You can put that under the alumni row. The reason why we've made it that way around, or suggest you do it that way around, is simply that current parents form a much smaller group than the alumni group. So if you take out those amounts from the parent group, it might look like the parent group aren't performing as well as they could be.
Thank you.
Okay.
Next question, can you please clarify what is the start and end date for the years included in the survey? Is this September through to August?
It is, yes, absolutely. 1st September to 31st of August.
Great. One more coming in regarding salary costs. Is it just salary, or does that include pension contributions and national insurance?
It's your gross salary. So, before tax and before national insurance and all that kind of stuff is taken out.
Thank you. And when is the closing date and deadline?
Jo, do you want to answer that one?
I think that we're working towards the end of January, and I think we just need to finalise that. Before we launch next Tuesday, we'll finalise a final deadline date, I think.
Yeah.
Does that sound okay, Chris?
Yes, absolutely. So we are looking at the end of January. That makes it just over 2 months, but we're taking into account that you've got Christmas and New Year in there, which is why we're being a little bit vague about that.
Thank you. It looks like the questions are starting to dry up a little bit, so I'll give you another minute or two in case you want to type in another question. Otherwise, I'll pass back to Jo. No, it looks like that's about it. So thanks very much to everyone for their questions. I will now hand you back to Jo for her closing comments.
Thank you, Liv, and thank you, Christian, and thank you to everyone for joining today's webinar. Some of you on the call will remember that we didn't used to do benchmarking, and this is very much a commitment and very much part of us sort of starting to professionalise the sector and to get the recognition that you deserve. And so I can't stress how important it is that everyone commits and participates in this survey. Every school with an alumni relations and or fundraising program can take part, and it opens next Tuesday the 8th. The survey is established. It's going to happen every other year, so it's something that is going to be part of our yearly calendar, and it's representative of the sector. So non-member schools can also participate if they have an alumni relations and fundraising program. It's free to participate, and the hard copy of the report is free. You have one free copy, but if you complete before the end of December, then you get 4 free copies which you can share with your senior management team, and the value of that is about £100. Christian mentioned that we're going to be sharing the findings from the report at the conference next June, but also we already have events agreed with AGBIS, with governors, and also in Scotland to share the information and educate heads, bursars and governors. So this is very much going to build momentum when the report is published next summer. So I would just end by saying this benchmarking survey has been developed by members, for members. It's here to inform and enable you, and I would ask you to consider encouraging and supporting your peers to participate with you. Thank you so much for joining us. If you've got any more questions, just give me or Louisa a call on 01225 829030, the usual number, and we'd be delighted to help you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.